Have you ever told yourself, "This is the last time," and then a day later found yourself doing the exact thing you swore you'd stop? Maybe it's late-night binge eating, or scrolling your phone for hours while the world passes by, or drinking, smoking, gambling, shopping. Even when you know it's hurting you, you feel guilty, frustrated, weak, like you're constantly letting yourself down. But what if I told you this isn't about willpower? What if the real reason it's so hard to quit is because your brain has been rewired to depend on it? That's what addiction does. It doesn't just hook your habits, it hijacks your brain's survival system. It turns temporary relief into long-term craving. It tricks you into thinking you need the very thing that's hurting you. In this video, we're going to break down the neuroscience of addiction and why quitting is so much harder than most people realize. You'll learn how addiction changes your brain chemistry, why just stop doesn't work and never has, the real reasons relapse happens, and most importantly, how healing is possible, even if it feels out of reach right now. Whether you're struggling with addiction yourself, supporting someone who is, or just trying to understand this battle on a deeper level, this is for you. You are not broken. You are not weak. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And today, you're going to learn how to take back control. Let's begin. So, what exactly is addiction? For a long time, people thought of it as a moral failure, a sign of weakness, selfishness, or lack of discipline. But neuroscience tells a different story. Addiction is not about bad choices. It's a chronic brain condition that affects the way we process pleasure, reward, and motivation. At its core, addiction is a cycle. Something gives you relief, a drink, a drug, a distraction. It floods your brain with feel-good chemicals like dopamine. You feel better for a moment. But over time, your brain adapts. You need more to get the same effect. And when you try to stop, you feel worse, not just emotionally, but physically and neurologically. That's the trap. And it's not limited to drugs or alcohol. People can become addicted to food, social media, gambling, porn, shopping, even work or toxic relationships. Because the brain doesn't care what the substance or behavior is, it cares about the reward. Here's the key. Addiction isn't about chasing pleasure. It's about avoiding pain. Most people don't get addicted because they love getting high or escaping. They get addicted because on some level they're hurting. And the addictive behavior becomes a way to cope, to survive, to feel something or to feel nothing. The American Society of Addiction Medicine defines addiction as a chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. In simpler terms, addiction rewires your brain to crave what gives you temporary relief, even when it causes long-term harm. It becomes less about choice and more about compulsion. And that's why telling someone to just stop doesn't work. They're not choosing to suffer. They're stuck in a system their brain has learned to depend on. The good news: just as the brain can be rewired by addiction, it can also be rewired for recovery. And understanding how addiction changes the brain is the first step in breaking the cycle. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. To understand why addiction is so hard to quit, we need to look inside the brain. Let's start with a key player: dopamine. Dopamine is often called the pleasure chemical, but that's only partly true. It's not just about feeling good, it's about motivation. Dopamine tells your brain, this thing is important, do it again. When you eat your favorite food, get a compliment, or check your phone and see a like, your brain releases dopamine. It's part of what motivates you to seek out rewards and repeat behaviors. Now imagine that dopamine release turned up 10 or 20 times higher. That's what happens with many addictive substances or behaviors. Whether it's alcohol, opioids, nicotine, gambling, or even social media, the dopamine spike is intense, and your brain takes notice. Here's where things change. Over time, the brain starts to adapt. It tries to maintain balance by lowering its natural dopamine production or reducing the number of dopamine receptors. This is called neuroadaptation. So now, the same behavior doesn't feel as rewarding as it once did. You need more of it to get the same effect. This is what we call tolerance. And when you stop, you feel worse, not just emotionally, but chemically. That's withdrawal. But addiction doesn't only affect dopamine, it changes the structure and function of the brain itself. It rewires three major systems. 1. The reward system, dopamine circuit. This gets hijacked to prioritize short-term relief over long-term well-being. 2. The prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, self-control, and future planning. Addiction weakens its function, making it harder to choose, not to use. 3. The limbic system, emotional brain. This becomes hyperactive, linking strong emotional memory to the addictive behavior. Just seeing a trigger, like a place, person, or feeling, can activate powerful cravings. Over time, addiction creates a loop. Trigger, craving, action, temporary relief, guilt, or crash. Trigger again. The more that loop repeats, the more ingrained it becomes. Neural pathways get stronger with repetition, like carving a trail in the forest. Eventually, that trail becomes the path of least resistance. And this is what makes addiction feel so automatic. Even when the logical brain knows it's harmful, the survival brain screams, "Do it, now." That's why quitting isn't just about stopping a behavior, it's about rewiring the entire loop, rebuilding dopamine balance, restoring decision-making, and learning to find relief through new, healthier pathways. The brain is plastic, which means it can change, for better or worse. Addiction rewires it, but with the right support, so can recovery. If you've ever tried to quit an addiction, or watch someone you love try, you know the feeling. You want to stop. You swear you'll stop. And then, you don't. Why does it feel like willpower just isn't enough? The truth is, by the time addiction is in full swing, the brain has been retrained to prioritize that behavior above almost everything else, even safety, even love, even survival. Let's start with cravings. Cravings aren't just wants. They're powerful urges rooted deep in the brain's reward and memory systems. They can be triggered by stress, environment, emotions, or even random reminders, a smell, a sound, a place. In that moment, the brain lights up. The limbic system, the emotional center, starts firing like it's in danger, and it screams for relief in the only way it knows, through the addictive behavior. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the rational voice that says, "Don't do it," is often too weak to win that battle. This is why people relapse even after months or years of being clean. It's not because they've failed, it's because the brain never forgets the shortcut it once used for relief. And then there's withdrawal, the body's painful reaction to the absence of the addictive substance or behavior. Withdrawal can be physical, headaches, nausea, tremors, insomnia, but it's also emotional, anxiety, depression, irritability, deep emptiness. This creates a cruel paradox. The very thing you're trying to quit is the thing your brain tells you will make the pain go away. So you're not just fighting a habit, you're fighting your own neurological wiring. And that wiring can take weeks, months, or even years to rebalance, which is why early recovery is so fragile and why relapse is common. Another layer, shame. After a relapse, people often feel guilt, self-hatred, or despair. But here's what most people don't understand. Shame feeds addiction. It adds more emotional pain, which makes the craving to escape even stronger. That's the loop. Addiction causes pain. Pain creates shame. Shame fuels more addiction. To break this loop, you don't just need discipline. You need compassion, structure, support, and tools to help your brain find safety in new ways. Recovery isn't about being stronger. It's about being understood and learning how to retrain the brain one step at a time. When most people think of addiction, they picture drugs or alcohol. And while those are serious and common forms, addiction actually goes far beyond substances. There are two broad categories of addiction: substance addictions and behavioral addictions. 1. Substance addictions. These involve physical substances that alter the brain's chemistry. Common examples include alcohol, nicotine, prescription medications like opioids or benzodiazepines, illicit drugs like cocaine, heroin, meth. These addictions often come with physical dependence, meaning your body adapts to the substance, and withdrawal symptoms appear when you stop using. But substance addictions aren't just physical. They also come with psychological dependence, which can be just as powerful. 2. Behavioral addictions. These don't involve an external chemical, but they affect the brain in similar ways. Think about gambling, pornography, gaming, compulsive shopping, social media, food, especially sugar or processed foods. These behaviors trigger dopamine spikes, especially when paired with unpredictability, novelty, or emotional reward. Over time, the brain develops the same pattern of craving, tolerance, and withdrawal. For example, a person addicted to gambling doesn't ingest a drug, but their brain lights up just like someone on cocaine. The same goes for compulsive phone use or binge eating. These types of addiction are often dismissed as bad habits or lack of discipline, but the neuroscience says otherwise. They follow the same pattern: trigger, craving, action, relief, guilt, repeat. And the pain they cause is very real: anxiety, depression, isolation, and damage to careers, relationships, and self-worth. Why this matters? Recognizing that addiction includes both substance and behavior is important for understanding and healing. Many people struggle with behavioral addictions and don't even realize it, because there's no obvious drug. But if something hijacks your time, numbs your emotions, feels out of your control, and hurts you more than it helps you, it might be addiction. And just like substance addiction, it deserves compassion, awareness, and support, not shame. Addiction doesn't happen in a vacuum. While brain chemistry plays a huge role, it often begins with something deeper, something more human. Let's start with trauma. Many people who struggle with addiction have experienced trauma at some point in their lives. This could be physical or emotional abuse, neglect, loss or abandonment, living in constant fear or instability. Trauma leaves a mark on the nervous system. It keeps the brain in survival mode, hyper-alert, overwhelmed, and looking for ways to feel safe. And addiction can feel like a solution. The substance or behavior becomes a way to escape the pain, numb the fear, or regulate emotions when the body doesn't know how to calm down on its own. In fact, addiction is often described as a form of self-medication, not a search for pleasure, but a desperate attempt to feel okay. Then there's stress. Even without major trauma, chronic stress, financial, relational, environmental, can make the brain more vulnerable to addiction. Why? Because stress increases cortisol, a hormone that throws off dopamine balance. When you're overwhelmed, your brain craves fast relief, and addiction offers it at a cost. And finally, genetics. Some people are born with a higher risk for addiction. Studies show that genetics can account for up to 50% of a person's vulnerability. This doesn't mean you're doomed, but it does mean your brain might be more sensitive to reward, or less efficient at regulating impulses. Environment plus experience plus genetics equals a perfect storm for some people. So when someone says, "Why don't they just stop?" they're missing the bigger picture. It's not just about stopping, it's about healing what's underneath, the pain, the wiring, and the belief that relief is only found in something destructive. Understanding the roots of addiction is what turns judgment into compassion, and compassion is where real change begins. One of the biggest obstacles to recovery isn't the addiction itself, it's the stigma around it. Addiction is one of the most misunderstood conditions in society. It's still often seen as a choice, a weakness, or a lack of moral character. People ask, why can't they just stop? Why would someone ruin their life like that? Or worse, they did this to themselves. But the science says otherwise. Addiction is not a series of bad decisions. It's a brain disease that affects decision-making. It changes how people think, feel, and act. It hijacks the very systems meant to help us survive. You wouldn't shame someone for having diabetes or depression. You wouldn't tell them to just snap out of it. Yet people with addiction hear that every day. And the result? Silence, isolation, shame. People hide their struggle, and they suffer longer because of it. Shame fuels secrecy. Secrecy fuels the addiction, and the cycle continues. The truth is, compassion isn't weakness, it's a lifeline. Because when someone feels safe enough to be seen, they're more likely to seek help. And that help becomes the first step toward healing. If we replace shame with science and blame with understanding, we change everything. Not just for the person struggling, but for families, communities, and generations. If addiction rewires the brain, then recovery is the process of rewiring it back, or more accurately, forward. But here's the truth. Recovery isn't one size fits all, and it's not just about stopping the behavior. It's about building a new way of living. So what actually works? 1. Connection studies have shown that isolation fuels addiction, while connection helps heal it. When people feel supported, seen, and safe, their brain starts to shift out of survival mode. Support groups, therapy, trusted friends, these aren't just nice to have. They're essential. As the saying goes, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. 2. Structure and routine. The addicted brain thrives on chaos and compulsive loops. Creating predictable, healthy routines helps rewire the nervous system. Sleep, movement, meals, mindfulness. It's not about being perfect. It's about consistency, even in small ways. 3. Learning emotional regulation. Addiction often replaces the brain's natural coping tools. Recovery means learning new ones, breathing techniques, grounding exercises, journaling, healthy boundaries, and saying no. Over time, your brain starts to rely on these tools instead of the addiction. 4. Reframing relapse. Relapse doesn't mean failure. It means the brain is still healing, and it needs more support. In fact, most people relapse at least once during recovery. That doesn't mean they're starting over. It means they're still learning. When relapse is met with shame, it often spirals. But when it's met with support, it becomes part of the recovery journey, not the end of it. What doesn't work? Shame, guilt, punishment, tough love without understanding, telling someone to just stop. These approaches often backfire because they ignore the biology of addiction. Real recovery is slow, layered, and deeply human. It's less about stopping something and more about starting something new. A life where the brain doesn't need escape to feel safe. If you're struggling with addiction or love someone who is, remember this. You are not broken. Your brain is doing what it learned to do: survive. Addiction is powerful, but so is healing. And the brain that was once wired for escape can also be rewired for resilience, peace, and real connection. Recovery isn't a straight line, it's a process. It takes time, tools, and support, but it is absolutely possible. Whether today is day 1, day 100, or a day after relapse, you're still worthy of healing. You're still allowed to try again. And if this video helped you understand addiction in a new way, share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Because when we trade shame for science and judgment for empathy, everything starts to change. You don't have to do this alone, and you don't have to stay stuck. There is always a way forward.